In partnership with Lighthouse Psychiatry, the City of Chandler presents a self-care series to promote positive mental health in our community. This is It's Okay to Not Be Okay.
Hi guys, my name is Rochelle Aguila. I am one of the licensed marriage and family therapists at Lighthouse.
And I'm Suzanne Northey. I'm also a licensed marriage and family therapist at Lighthouse Psychiatry. And today we want to talk about how couples can keep their relationships strong and resilient during this rather difficult time. So I know, Rochelle, you and I work with a lot of couples.
Yes.
And what we have seen is some very unique situations since the onset of the pandemic. I would say one of the things I've really seen a lot in my practice is issues around childcare and homeschooling. So for couples that have children, they've had to make a lot of adjustments. So back in the spring when the pandemic hit pretty hard, schools shut pretty abruptly. Couples had to figure out what are we going to do with our kids. Mm-hmm. And now they've been put into a role of being the educator for their kids. And even though schools are getting back on track and they're starting to open up again, most kids are still online. And so parents are still taking a much more active role in education than they had prior to now. And then there's just fewer child care providers available for couples that are going off to work every day. So it's been a big challenge.
I totally agree. I also have couples that I see, in sessions that tell me that they're also having a hard time finding me time, because as much as kids are, there's some kids that are still at home doing mm-hmm. virtual learning. Most couples who do work and go into the office are telling me that they're probably going to have to end up staying at home and working from home probably till the end of the year. So trying to find that balance of I have to do my work, mm-hmm. I have to be a parent, I have to be a spouse. Where do I find time for myself?
Right.
Right.
So, exactly. So a lot of renegotiation on mm-hmm. roles and responsibilities, and sometimes that's not easy. Being able to take on new tasks, like you said, maybe one partner is going off to work and the other is working remotely from home. There might be an expectation of the partner that's going off to work that the one at home is taking on more tasks like cooking and cleaning and that kind of thing, and that is, might be an area of conflict for some couples.
Totally. I think even taking on the role of a teacher too, that
yes.
You didn't really think that was going to be part of your role.
Absolutely.
But because of what's going on now, trying to find that balance is difficult.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
And one other thing I've really noticed with some of the couples is there's a lot of financial strain that's going on right now because, a lot of people have been furloughed, laid off from their jobs, so there's maybe a single income home. It might even be that someone had to quit their job to stay home and take care of the kids.
Right. Totally.
Yeah.
Yep. I agree.
And I think the other thing I've noticed, too, is there's just a lot of uncertainty, I think, for all of us. But within a relationship, there's questions about, what's coming next? Are we going to return to normal? And if not, what is the new normal? And how do we navigate that?
I think that a lot of the couples just struggle to, like what we've been talking about, just finding that balance, mm-hmm. And the not knowing. That can create a lot of stress and anxiety, too, within yourself. And then trying to make sure that you have it all together can mm-hmm. be difficult.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
And I think another thing just in general is that there's a lot of fear. So fear of, contracting the coronavirus, fear mm-hmm. of exposing vulnerable people to the virus. So that's just kind of running as an undercurrent all the time for many people. Yes, and that really manifests itself in relationships.
I agree. Totally agree.
So another thing, too, I think work-life balance is a bit challenging. You were talking a little bit about the need for me time. But I think now with couples that are, trying to, maybe working from home, going to the office, and then also being the primary educator for their kids at this point anyway, that they are feeling overwhelmed and they have a lot on their plate. But what's missing is the fun, the balance. So leisure activities. So things maybe they like to go to concerts or sporting events or, weekend getaways. And those things have been more challenging since this has been going on. So it feels like a lot of work and no play.
I totally agree. So when couples come into sessions and they're telling me we're having these challenges, mm-hmm. They ask me, well, what do we want to do now? What do we do with this new reality? And one of the things that I talk to them about is see if you can keep up with the same routine, you know, as if you were going to work.
Absolutely.
Get ready at the same time, have breakfast together, and then, you know, do the work. And after work, see if you can keep the same routine too. If that means, you know, if you have some time to yourself and exercise, or if it means, hey, why don't we go and make dinner together, spend some time with the kids? And at the end of the day, if part of the routine is having a couple time, try to see if you can keep that up too.
Very important. Routine is, you know, I had a friend one time who was working from home, not during the pandemic, but I just remember her telling me that she would get up, throw her sweatpants on, throw her hair in a ponytail, not shower. And so she would say, you know, I feel like I'm getting depressed. I'm in this weird rut of, you know, the situation where I'm not having that kind of routine. So I think that really is important.
And along with the routine, I think it's, again, you mentioned it earlier, finding some me time, finding some alone time is really important. And that alone time could mean, hey, you know, I need to spend more time with work. There's this project. What I'm hearing from couples too, they're telling me that working from home is a lot more stressful. They feel like they have more work than when they were going into the office. So I think it's important to communicate if you want that time to just finish a project or finish this meeting, and then also communicate to them to let them know, hey, definitely after this, I want to reconnect. I want some time with you.
Yes. Yes, and I know in particular for introverts that me time is very important to kind of recharge their batteries. So another thing too I've noticed, and maybe you have too in your practice, but couples are talking more about seeing a side of their partner that is not as attractive.
Right.
Like more irritability, more frustration, more anger. And it may be as a result of what's going on, or it may be just a side of them that's always been there, but they didn't spend so much time together. So they're like, wow, I hadn't seen this before. So, you know, adjusting to that and trying to work through that.
Right. And I think too, it could be a positive thing too, and not realizing like, wow, that is your voice at work and you sound very firm and put together and in control. You know, I think it's also taking that time to appreciate and be grateful about this experience, trying to find the positive.
Yes.
You know, of I didn't know this side of you because I'd never really worked with you, and that's actually kind of attractive.
Right,
Right.
exactly.
Right.
So yes, there's the good things as well. And one of the things I think maybe the light at the end of the tunnel in all of this is that a lot of couples fall into kind of a rut. They're into this sort of homeostatic, predictable kind of relationship. Their interactions are very just, you know, they're routine, but they're not really happy. So they, but it's what they know. So they get complacent.
Right.
And when they're complacent, they don't really work on the relationship. So sometimes when something is disruptive as a pandemic, you know, comes along, it shakes things up in the relationship. And if they have a pretty good foundation to begin with, it really is a great time for change. It's like the couple says, wow, we need to do something. You know, if we don't, you know, things could fall apart. So they're much more motivated for positive change.
I totally agree. Again, and it's about thinking about the relationship, right? What can we do with the situation? What's the best thing we can do with the situation? Because it is what it is. And the other thing that I recommend to couples too is try to see if you can spend some alone time together, that quality time together. And it's a really good opportunity to be creative and, you know, have date nights. And that's what I recommend. See if you can order in, set up the living room, the dining room, like a restaurant if you want to. Have the kids have their own little table, but making sure that you spend that quality time together and that you give that attention to your partner.
Absolutely. I think keeping the romance alive, love notes, and, you know, sending texts throughout the day, even if you're in the same home together, just really not forgetting that part of the relationship.
I had one couple that they share the same room, the same office. They're literally back to back while they're working. And I said, well, why don't you guys send a text message of, hi, how are you doing? And they gave me a funny look and they said, but wasn't that a good disruption though? Just like, what the heck? you know, add
Right.
some positive, some humor into it, because we're all in this together, and we might as well try to make the best out of the situation.
Yes, I think this is a good opportunity to learn some new skills and new ways of communicating in a relationship.
Right. And I just want to go back to what I was saying earlier about finding gratitude.
Yes.
Right. Of the situation, knowing that your partner is still with you, that is still in the same household. You know, I
Right.
had a session one time and the couple was arguing, and I just looked at them, and when they were done, they looked at me and they're like, "Why are you looking at us like that?" And I said, "Well, have you guys stopped and thought, wow, you guys can actually argue face to face, and some couples can't."
Yes.
You know, depending on the situation, maybe they're stuck at work and they don't really get to see each other that much, or that maybe one person is sick and they can't be at the hospital with them. But you have that opportunity, and we take that for granted.
I think that's very true. The glass half full is really important right now. I think it's really what sustains us and keeps us, moving forward.
I totally agree. One of the other things too, that we talk about is communication. But
Yeah.
I know John Gottman, and he talks about some of these things, 4 horsemen.
Yes. So yes, communication is key, and I think it's a really good point. Before we talk about how to communicate,
Right.
it's really important to talk about maybe how not to communicate. There are certain ways of communicating that are detrimental to relationships. So John Gottman, who is like a very well-known researcher on couples interactions. In fact, he's seen over 1,000
I
couples
think, like
in
he said,
his
3,000
love
couples
lab.
or something, right?
And what he does is he actually hooks them up to what's called a pulse oximeter and tests their heart rate and respiration, and can really tell when he has the couples talk about some kind of conflict in the relationship, and he monitors their physiological responses and can really see when they're becoming distressed. So it's very interesting research, but what's come out of it is those 4 horsemen of the apocalypse, and these are the things that can really predict, actually, that relationships will fail. The first one is criticism. So there is a difference between criticism and complaining. So within relationships, there's always, some complaints about, I feel like I'm doing more of the housework, or I'm doing a lot of the cooking. That's a complaint, but a criticism is really a personal attack towards the partner. It's you always put yourself first. You're never there for me. That kind of thing is very harmful to a relationship. Another one is contempt, and it's a little bit like criticism, only it's more kind of a mean-spirited way of communication. It's eye-rolling, it's sarcasm, it's mocking their partner.
I think it's intentional, right?
Absolutely.
Right.
Yeah, name-calling, those kind of things where it's just really harmful, like just attacking the partner in some really unkind ways.
It could really be unhealthy to a relationship, and instead of trying to work things out, it creates more distance and disconnect between the two people.
Absolutely.
Right.
So another one he would say is defensiveness. So if a partner comes in and says, I have this, complaint or concern or issue within the relationship, for the other partner to take no responsibility, or to say, well, I wouldn't do that if you didn't do this, or
Right.
so there's no accountability, and so it really divides couples when one is not willing to listen and at least acknowledge their role in the problems within that relationship.
I think oftentimes I hear when one partner is being defensive, the other person usually says, I just don't feel heard. I don't get
Right.
I don't get the support that I need.
Right.
Right.
Absolutely. And then the last one, and actually the one that's most predictor of a relationship ending, is stonewalling. And this usually happens a little bit later in a relationship when all the other 3 are existing, but it's literally the silent treatment. One partner approaches the other and they don't respond. They might walk out of the room. They just are very dismissive.
I think they're completely disengaged.
Absolutely disengaged. They're withdrawn from the relationship. And so those 4 things are very high predictors of marriages and relationships breaking up.
I agree. I totally agree. So when we have couples that who are suffering or going through some of these things, they come into the session just feeling defeated at times.
Right.
And one of the things, definitely one of the first first few sessions that I talk about is the importance of communication. It is not what's going to solve the problem, but it's definitely a tool that you can use to help start having this discussion
Yes.
towards, a solution.
Absolutely.
And the very first thing I tell them is, see if you can come into these conversations, these discussion with curiosity. Meaning, I really do care. I want to understand. I want to hear what you have to say.
Yes.
I want to know what you're feeling because I am curious.
Right. And I think another important thing in terms of communication is really along those same lines of being curious. It's not making assumptions.
Right.
So that can really be I guess very harmful to a relationship when rather than asking, when you said this, did you mean such and
Right.
such? Rather than just assuming and then being hurt or offended in some way.
I tell a lot of my couples, assumption is one of my biggest enemy in this field. And, we all have assumptions because we've had experiences. We spent some time with people in our relationships. But I think it's important to note that assumption is not a fact until you get that information to verify I was right. So I think when communicating, it's important to actively listen.
Yes.
Just
very
like how you're
important.
doing it right now.
Yeah.
And really what it means is you want to listen. You want to hear what the other person is saying. You put your thoughts, feelings, opinions aside, and you're not sitting there just ready to interject and say what you think or already defend yourself. Because when you're doing that, you're really not present. You're not really listening because you're sitting there thinking and waiting for you to speak and not hearing what the other person has to say.
Right. And so along the lines of I guess healthy communication, I statements. So taking ownership, I feel this way when you do that. It's not you do this. It's I feel this. This is my perception of what you're doing. So it's I own that this is my feeling and it's not necessarily accurate or true.
And it goes back to what you were saying earlier about accountability,
Yes.
right? That I may be wrong, but this is how I feel. This is what I think. And that's why communication is key, is to have that, taking turns.
Yes.
You're going back and forth, and this is what I think about it. What about you? How do you feel about it? I think has been really helpful with couples who can go through this time and just communicating and being there for each other. I think the other important thing to note, too, is validation.
Yes.
Is
Extremely important.
that means you don't necessarily have to agree with the other person, but you can at least, validate this was what they're feeling, what they're thinking. I use examples of starting sentences with, I see that you feel that way. I understand why you may be frustrated, but this is how I see things. Again, using I statements, taking accountability, but validating that this is, how you're thinking, what
Yes.
you're feeling. Right.
Well, it's that, agree to disagree.
Exactly.
Like, we may not see this the same way, but I respect your position and I want you to respect my position.
Right.
Yeah.
Exactly. I think one of the things, too, is to keep in mind is take a step back and stop and think, with what I'm about to say, is this going to help or hurt our relationship?
Yes.
Right?
Extremely important. I think that sometimes people want to be right so badly that
Yes.
they would rather be right than nurture the relationship in a positive way.
Because I think oftentimes, especially during this pandemic, they just want to be heard.
Yes.
And communicating that and just say, hey, I just want to talk. I just want to vent my frustration. Or even communicating, I really just need some alone time because
Right.
we've been working, we've been dealing with the kids, and I think I just want to have some alone time, be adults, be a couple. I think is really
Absolutely.
important.
So do you have any other tips, or you think that's a good toolbox that we
I
have
think so.
provided?
I
Okay.
think so.
Yeah, so I would just kind of wrap up by saying that for anybody, healthy relationships, struggling relationships, this is a really hard time, right?
Right.
And it's something we've never really had to go through before, not in my lifetime anyway, and certainly not with couples. And so I would, recommend to couples that they use some of these skills that we talk about today. But if they don't really feel like it's enough, or maybe they need more help, to maybe seek out a therapist or a spiritual counselor, maybe get some good books on, communication and conflict resolution, some videos, something that would really help them work on their relationship so they can get through this in the healthiest way.
I totally agree. I think it's important to know that we're all in this together. We're suffering together and trying to adjust to the situation.
Yeah.
But I also think it's important to remember that, try to be positive, experience, feel what you're feeling. I often tell my clients, feel the feels.
Right.
Allow yourself to experience
Exactly.
what you're feeling. Get validated. Let your partner know. And what you were saying earlier too is it's important to look at this time as an opportunity for positive change, not just for the couple or for the relationship, but for yourself too.
Right. Totally agree.